Will he? Did you hear the haunting question in the gospel reading? Luke means for it to hang in the air. And the story then moves on to something else, leaving the question to sit for a moment. Will he? When Jesus returns, what will he find? Will he find faith on earth? It's a very interesting, very timely question. Friends, October 8th, it was 21 years ago. It's hard to imagine that for me. The average length of stay for Episcopal clergy nationally is less than 4 years. I promised 2 years to my predecessor, the Reverend Bruce Moncrief, an older, godly, wonderful priest. His wife Elizabeth, they co-pastored the church. My family doesn't quite come in that arrangement, but some clergy families do. And so I was called October 8th, 1995, my very first Sunday. I know a couple of people were in that room that Sunday. We were meeting in Edwards at the dance studio. It's the only time I've ever preached where I was watching myself in the mirror with the bar. I could almost put my leg up, on the bar near where the old post office, where the thrifty shop is now. That's where I joined you, October 8th, 1995. Earlier, I was in the Vail Chapel for my very first service of the Transfiguration. And the couple handing out bulletins that Sunday were Morgan and Kathy Douglas. And from that Sunday until last Sunday, after she had turned 96 years old, Kathy Douglas never missed a Sunday unless she was in the hospital or she was ski racing. Do you know that Kathy, who never told you how good a skier she was, regularly smoked skiers 20 years her junior? She skied, in the words of one of our ski instructors, like a scalded Scottish dog. She could ski anybody's legs off of any age. And she would travel to do that. Or she was in the hospital. But if she wasn't there, she was actually in church. Her church attendance record is far better than mine, which is kind of humbling. When we had our Nights event, our fundraiser, annual fundraiser for the Edwards Interfaith Chapel, 2 years ago, I believe it was, Kathy was 94 years old at that point. We honored Kathy and Morgan for their contribution. The Vail Interfaith Chapel, the Vail Valley Medical Center, the Vail Library. You cannot walk through the town of Vail and not see the legacy of one of our founding families all around you. They were in all of it. And they never said a word about it. So we honor Kathy. Morgan has been deceased for about a year at this point. We honor Kathy at this big dinner right here in this room. There's 200 people here, Jews and Christians, and people helping to support our community center. And Kathy gets her little glass statue award, and she stands up and asks for the microphone. This was not rehearsed. I had no idea what she was going to say. So we hand her the microphone. Do anybody remember this? Yeah. And she said, I have not missed church for years. Every Sunday, it's a privilege to worship in church. Kathy missed the memo that this was actually a community center event, and there were Jews in the room and so forth, and she says, and it's been a privilege. She handed the microphone back to me and sat down. That was it. That was the one thing that this woman had to say. I mean, if you had your moment, what would you say? 3 sentences she had. Last Sunday, she's 96 years old. with a walker. It took her like 2 minutes to get to the altar. And she came walking up just like she had, because she knew it's such a privilege to approach the altar of God. It's a privilege to gather here. And it only takes an illness, something scary. The minute that you can't come here, boy, do people begin to appreciate the privilege that we share to be sitting in the chairs in which you're seated this morning. It's a privilege. Will Jesus find faith on earth if he were to return today? Kathy's answer is, as long as she was able to approach the altar of God, yes. What's my answer? Well, what would your answer be? This is like preaching to the choir, but you can sit there and take it for just a second. Jeremiah talks, a beautiful reading from Jeremiah. The words new covenant do not appear first in the Gospels or the letters of Paul. The word new covenant appears one time in all the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's in this selection from Jeremiah. All you need to remember from the book of Jeremiah is 31:31, chapter 31, verse 31. This is the money verse of the entire book. Jeremiah, who's been preaching his entire life and no one's listened to him, says he sees, God gives him a moment, and he sees that the Torah, scrolls upon commandments, 413 of them if you add them all up. He sees a day when no one will have to study Torah anymore. The children won't have to memorize the commandments. The parents won't have to remind their kids, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're not supposed to do. Jeremiah sees a moment when that Torah is embedded into the human heart. It's written into our hearts. We don't have to teach what to do anymore. Did you hear me struggling to try and tell the children about their hearts, which is good language for children and adults, about how to live life according to a certain code, no matter what else is happening around you? I've come back to this for some reason. The readings are bringing us back week after week to the word. What would be the English word for what Jeremiah is describing? Integrity. To be the same person on Saturday night that you are on Sunday morning. To be the same person in front of a computer screen that you are when you're talking to someone real time. To be that person that knows on a fundamental level what is right and good and decent in this world, and then to act from that all the time. This is the picture that Jeremiah was looking at. What makes me so sad about Kathy and Christopher's death is not that I'm wondering where they are. Christians do not have to agonize over, oh my God, what's happening to their soul right now. We know where Kathy is. We know where Christopher is. We know where the people we love. When God claims someone's life, he never lets go. That's the great comfort of being a believer. His death never has the final word. We know that. My sadness is that we're saying goodbye to a generation that knew how to make a commitment in the face of horrific moral challenge and stand by that commitment when everything else was going to hell. If we didn't have children in the video, I would use the word stronger than hell. I learned something from Kathy Douglas. I learned what moral fiber really looks like. Kathy was a young girl. Her father was an engineer for the Ford Motor Company, I believe. And he developed engines for the Ford Motor Company. The Ford Motor Company, does anybody know this story? Had a contract in Germany. And so Kathy and her father and family were moved to Germany to work for the German government. Kathy remembers, she's told me the story, she was a young girl when some men in Nazi uniforms showed up at their house one night, knocked on the door, and came in to visit with her dad. The Nazi regime wanted a new engine for a new tank that they were constructing. And they wanted Kathy's father to design and build this engine. They left a framed, signed picture of Adolf Hitler with Kathy's dad. And that night, Kathy remembers her father packing up his stuff and his wife's stuff and her stuff, and they left that night. This is why Kathy was raised in England, if you know her. Her father fled from Germany to England. And, in the process, deprived Adolf Hitler of an engine that would be used to kill American and British soldiers. Everything is not a business deal. Her father acted on that deep moral fiber that he had been given, and he watched and she watched him do that, and she was formed by that experience. A new covenant, Jeremiah says, that deep integrity. Every moment is a moment in which God's will can be expressed. And we can be part of those moments everywhere. And the world needs us to be. It's that deep commitment that drove Kathy to make a commitment to God in church every single Sunday. I want to tell you that I am the worst churchgoer in the world. No one's worse than I am. I'm from Florida. Everything I grew up skiing with had a rope behind it. I remember last January getting in the car on a Sunday morning, -16 on the temperature gauge of the car. And I am driving, and Steve's right behind me, through a blinding snowstorm to go to Vail. Who in the heck is going to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning to go to church? I complained to God and anybody else privately that would listen in my car, from Edwards to Avon to Minturn to West Vail. I was complaining all the way there. Do you know who was waiting for me at the Vail Chapel at 7:45 in the morning? -16. Who was sitting right there? Kathy Douglas. She greeted me with a smile, and I felt so ashamed. She reminded me of the privilege it is to sit in the seats that you were sitting in. She reminded me what commitment really looks like. And she reminded me always about how to model life based on core commitments that are about integrity and character. Paul reminded Timothy, same thing in the reading this morning. Paul says, when is there a bad time to talk about the right things? Paul's writing his own epitaph. He's writing to Timothy, but he's about to be executed. He's writing to himself. He's writing to us. And he says, preach the message all the time, when it's convenient and when it's inconvenient. The truth is never convenient. Paul says, I'm about to die. I don't care. I don't have time to jerk around. I'm going to speak the truth. And Timothy, I want you to do the same thing. He says the scriptures always call us to God's truth. They're our book. When is it a bad time to say the right thing? When is it a bad time to speak the truth in love? When is it a bad time to stand for the principles that we know in our heart are right? Paul's answer is never. It is never a bad time. It might be inconvenient, but who cares? Who cares? Who cares? I can tell you that, again, in a moment that our church faced a profound crisis, people were talking about leaving our congregation based on issues of human sexuality and what the Episcopal Church is doing, and what the culture is doing, and why aren't we doing this, and why aren't we preaching that, I sat with Morgan and Kathy. And I said, what are you going to do? And they both looked at me in their living room and they said, what are you going to do? We're going to be there next Sunday. That was the only thing they ever said about the subject of all the culture wars about human sexuality in the Episcopal Church. They never missed a day. What a beautiful witness that was to me. Can I tell you finally that this is the Sunday we get the widow in Jesus' parable about how to pray? This is the Sunday. Did you see that cool picture I found for the cover? Jesus is telling. Now, Jesus was never married, but he had a good idea about human relationships. Because this story is about the unjust judge doing the right thing because a woman asked him often enough, gentlemen, isn't it true that we will come to the right decision with the proper influence over time? This actually is true. Can men get the memo? Yes. The unjust judge says in Jesus' shocking parable, oh my God, I don't fear God. I'm not afraid of any human being. I'm just going to decide for this woman because she is pestering me every day. Which some women know how to do to benefit men. That is true. The focus wasn't on the pestering woman. Jesus' focus is to be persistent over time. To be consistent in prayer. This parable tells you something really interesting. Does your prayer matter to God? Does your voice make a difference? Does it count? Do you matter in this world? Can you represent God's love? Can you make a difference in other people's lives? This is critically important because I hear people telling me right now in our political process that they feel left out, they feel disenfranchised and voiceless. And to that, Jesus says, and it's a theological term, may I quote it, I'll be on YouTube. No! Jesus says, your voice matters profoundly. Your prayer changes the world. What you say and do matters in people's lives. You can change people's hearts with God's help. This is the lesson, I believe, of the story of the unjust judge. Is that widow would not give up seeking the justice that she deserved. And we should not either. When Jesus returns, if Jesus were to come back, even 23 days before an election, will he find faith on her? Will he find you? Will he find me? As long as you're seated in these chairs, I have great confidence that God will find some tremendously faithful people. Thanks be to God. In the name of God, Father, Son,